The world knew her as a mechanic. The men in pressed uniforms called her greased monkey. But deep down, Emma Tran knew she was a pilot. At 29 half Vietnamese, she carried the kind of brilliance that should have lit up every room she walked into. Instead, it made her invisible. She had been first in her class at the Air Force Academy, a prodigy who could dissect a flight manual the way others read bedtime stories. Her instructors once joked she had jet fuel in her veins. They said it in admiration. But here, at Granite Ridge Air Base in Colorado, the laughter was different. It was sharper. It cut. The Griffin HX-9 helicopters were the crown jewels of American aviation. Sleek, armored birds with carbon fiber bodies and twin turbines that could howl across the sky at 200 miles per hour. Each was a machine worth more than the houses the pilots left behind. Each demanded precision, courage, and flawless instinct. Only 16 pilots in the entire military were cleared to fly them. 16 men. Not Emma. She worked beneath the very machines she had once been trained to command, oil staining her uniform, hydraulic fluid marking her skin like war paint. Every morning she ran her fingers across the cool metal fuselage, whispering to herself that one day she'd be inside the cockpit, not beneath it. The officers had a name for her, better at fixing than flying. They said it loud enough for her to hear. They wanted her to hear. And when she walked past a flight roster, when her name wasn't there, the laughter trailed behind like a shadow. What they never understood was that Emma's shadow carried weight. 7 years earlier, her father, Colonel Robert Tran, had died in a mission gone wrong. The official report called it a coordination error. Bad intel. Wrong coordinates. A system failure that demanded a scapegoat. And so Emma was grounded before her wings had even opened. Not because she lacked skill, not because she failed, but because the military had a long memory, and her family name carried a tragedy they didn't want to repeat. That Tuesday morning in November was supposed to be routine. Check the hydraulics on Unit 3. File the requisition forms. Disappear like she always did in the hangar shadows. Until the alarm shattered the monotony. Code red. Flooded sector. For soldiers stranded. Immediate rescue required. The base erupted into chaos. Radios spat static. Officers sprinted across the tarmac. Pilots scrambled, voices clashing, names being crossed off the deployment list. One pilot had a broken wrist. Another was on leave. A third was grounded. One by one, the 16 dwindled into silence. No one left. No one ready. For soldiers, trapped by rising water, were about to drown. Emma stood frozen in the maintenance bay, a wrench heavy in her trembling hands. Her heart raced, not with fear, but with certainty. This was the moment. Her moment. She dropped the wrench. The clang echoed like a starting gun. With steady steps, she crossed to the Griffin HX-9, tail number 77 Alpha. The helicopter gleamed like a sleeping predator under the fluorescent lights. For 7 years, she had dreamed of sitting inside it. Now she climbed into the cockpit as though it had been waiting for her all along. Her leather gloves squeaked against the controls. Her breath steadied. Every switch, every lever, every dial was exactly where her mind had memorized it 1,000 times over. The checklist wasn't written on paper anymore. It was tattooed into her soul. Hydraulics, green. Fuel, full. Weather, storm, but flyable. Tower. This is Griffin HX-9, tail 77 Alpha. Requesting immediate clearance for emergency deployment to Sector 6 Bravo. The radio snapped back, sharp and disbelieving. Negative. Identify yourself. This is Lieutenant Emma Tran, she answered, her voice firm. Qualified and ready for rescue. Another voice, heavier, clipped with authority. Absolutely not. You are not authorized. Return to maintenance duties at once. But Emma's hand was already pushing the throttle. The Griffin lifted from the concrete, a beast awakened. Rotors slicing the sky with a mechanical roar. She rose higher, the hangars shrinking beneath her, the base a storm of shouting officers pointing upward in disbelief. Who authorized this flight? Voices barked in the tower. She's maintenance crew, not flight crew. But no one could stop her now. Emma Tran was flying. The helicopter tilted forward, disappearing into the storm clouds gathering over the Rocky Mountains. Down at the base gate, a black sedan rolled to a stop. Out stepped General Michael Blake, silver-haired, steel-eyed, a man who had seen war carve lines into his face. He was here for an inspection, or so the paper said. But as he looked up, his gaze caught the helicopter vanishing into the storm. "What aircraft is that?" he demanded. "Unauthorized flight, sir," a young officer stammered, sweat beading despite the cold. "We're attempting to recall her immediately." "Who's flying it?" The officer checked his tablet. His voice cracked when he answered. "Lieutenant Emma Tran, sir. She's maintenance personnel." The color drained from Blake's face. His hand trembled. "Tran," he whispered. "Yes, sir. Her father was Colonel Robert Tran." Blake's throat tightened. Memories surged. 7 years ago, Robert Tran had flown into enemy fire to drag him out of certain death. Robert had broken every protocol, defied orders, and saved him when the system had failed. 2 weeks later, Robert Tran was dead. Blake stared at the sky where Emma's helicopter had vanished. For years, he had tried to protect her, to carve out a path in a military that devoured outliers. But bureaucracy had buried his efforts, just as it had buried her father. Now, watching her disappear into the storm, Blake understood. Robert's courage hadn't died that day. It was alive, burning in the cockpit of 77 Alpha. The young officer interrupted his silence. "Sir, should we scramble another helicopter to intercept?" General Blake's eyes never left the clouds. "No, Lieutenant," he said softly. "We wait. Have you ever seen someone step into a role everyone said they weren't ready for, and prove, in a single moment, that they were born for it?" The storm did not welcome her. It roared, it clawed, it screamed against the Griffin's frame like a beast trying to shake her loose. Rain lashed the windshield in sheets, each drop sounding like a bullet striking steel. The rotor blades whined under the strain, their rhythm fighting the chaos. Emma gripped the controls tighter. Her hands didn't tremble. They couldn't. The mountains ahead rose like jagged teeth, half swallowed in mist. Lightning stitched the sky, tearing the world open in white-hot cracks. The Griffin shuddered each time the wind shifted, but she rode the turbulence like a surfer on waves she'd studied all her life. Behind her, for soldiers were clinging to life in the floodwaters. She could see them in her mind, stranded, cold, desperate. Every second lost meant another inch of water, another breath slipping away. Granite Ridge Command to Griffin 77 Alpha. Return immediately. The radio spat static with urgency. She flicked it off. No more voices telling her she couldn't. Instead, she switched to the emergency frequency. Any call sign, "This is Griffin Rescue inbound to Sector 6 Bravo. Do you copy?" The reply was faint, barely audible over the hiss of interference. "Griffin Rescue, this is Sergeant Martinez. We're on top of our Humvee waters, rising fast. Can't hold much longer." Emma closed her eyes for half a heartbeat. That voice, that fear, ignited something inside her. "Hold tight, Sergeant. I've got you." She crested a final ridge, and then she saw it. The valley below was no longer land. It was a raging, churning sea. Brown water, thick with debris, twisted through the canyon like a living thing. Trees snapped and vanished into the torrent. Cars and shattered rooftops spun helplessly in the current. And in the center of it all, a military Humvee, half submerged, the roof barely above the waves. For figures clung to it, their camouflage soaked, their knuckles white. The landing zone? Non-existent. Power lines on 3 sides. A wall of trees on the 4th. Less than 20 feet of clearance. One mistake here wasn't just dangerous, it was fatal. Emma inhaled deeply, then exhaled slow. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "The storm isn't your enemy. It's your test." She dropped the Griffin into a hover, 6 feet above the chaos. The downdraft from the rotors blasted the water into a furious spray, a hurricane in miniature. The helicopter bucked, fighting the gusts that screamed through the canyon. Emma grabbed the loudspeaker. "One at a time. Harness to your chest." I've got you. The first soldier looked up, blinking through the storm. His eyes widened in disbelief. The pilot wasn't one of the 16 men he knew. The pilot was a woman. Calm. Steady. Focused. "Who the hell are you?" he shouted over the roar. Emma's voice came back over the speaker, even and unshakable. "I'm the one who doesn't leave soldiers behind." The rescue cable descended, swaying dangerously in the wind. The first soldier clipped in. Emma lifted him away from the water, her hands moving across the controls with the precision of a pianist. The Griffin danced in the gale, a giant bird fighting invisible hands that tried to hurl it into the power lines. But Emma didn't flinch. One by one, she pulled them free. The second soldier was hypothermic, shaking uncontrollably. The third, his arm broken, screamed in pain as the harness lifted him skyward. And finally, Sergeant Martinez, the one who had kept them alive with nothing but stubborn willpower. The moment his boots touched the cabin floor, the Humvee below gave a metallic groan, tilted sideways, and disappeared beneath the surface. 30 seconds. That's all that separated them from death. The flight back wasn't a victory lap. It was 47 minutes of combat against the storm. Lightning snapped so close the cockpit instruments flickered. Wind shear slammed the helicopter sideways more than once, the frame groaning in protest. Emma's jaw clenched until her teeth ached, but her hands never faltered. She threaded the Griffin through the valleys like a needle through cloth, steady, unyielding, carrying 4 lives with her. And then, finally, the base came into view. Every soul at Granite Ridge was watching. Officers lined the tarmac. Maintenance crews froze mid-task. Even the clerks from admin left their desks to see the impossible. 77 Alpha gliding home through the storm. Emma brought the helicopter down as softly as silk on skin. Engines hummed, rotors slowed, and then silence. The 4 rescued soldiers stepped onto the concrete, alive because of her. Emma slid from the cockpit, oil-stained gloves, windswept hair, eyes that still burned with the storm she had conquered. The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't clap. They just stared. And then the sea of uniforms parted. General Michael Blake stepped forward, silver hair glinting under the floodlights, eyes sharp as steel, the kind of man whose voice could shape a career or end one. He stopped 3 feet from Emma. Slowly, deliberately, he removed his cap, and then he saluted. His words rang out like a gunshot across the stunned silence. "Greetings, Pilot 17, the person I once owed my life to. What do you think happens when the system that tried to silence you is suddenly forced to acknowledge your worth?" The rotor blades slowed to a crawl, then stopped. The storm outside still rumbled, but the real thunder was the silence on the tarmac. Hundreds of eyes fixed on Emma, some wide with disbelief, others narrowed with anger. She stood in the shadow of the Griffin, flight gloves still on, chest rising and falling with the rhythm of someone who had just stared death in the face and won. And yet it wasn't pride she felt. It was something heavier, the weight of what came next. Because in the crowd, one man was walking toward her. General Michael Blake. The name alone carried 28 years of command, a man who had survived 3 wars, who had seen more soldiers buried than most men had met in a lifetime. But as he approached Emma, there was something in his face that didn't belong to a general. Not authority, not anger, something more fragile. He stopped 3 feet from her, removed his cap, saluted. "Greetings, Pilot 17, he said, his voice steady, carrying across the airfield. "The person I once owed my life to." Emma blinked. The words hit her harder than the storm ever could. "What did you say?" Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Officers exchanged looks, unsure if they were witnessing a promotion or an execution. Blake's gaze didn't waver. "Your father," he said softly. "Colonel Robert Tran. 7 years ago, he saved me, at the cost of his own life." Emma froze. For years, the details of her father's death had been wrapped in official reports, bureaucratic phrases like coordination error and miscommunication of intel. But now, here, stood the man whose life her father had traded his own for. "You were there," she whispered. Blake's jaw tightened. He nodded once. I was supposed to die that day. The intel was flawed. The convoy walked straight into an ambush. RPGs, machine guns, we were surrounded. I ordered your father to stay back. Ordered him to wait for backup. His voice grew heavier, carrying the weight of years. But Robert didn't listen. He flew, in any way, straight into the fire. Landed under bullets, pulled me out, carried me through hell. 2 weeks later, he was gone. Emma's throat burned. She could almost see it, the helicopter cutting through smoke, her father's steady hands on the controls, his decision to defy orders for the sake of one man's life. The same decision she had just made. Why didn't anyone ever tell me? She demanded, her voice breaking. Blake's eyes flickered with guilt. I tried. God knows I tried. But bureaucracy doesn't forgive disobedience, even when it saves lives. They buried his sacrifice under protocol. And they grounded you because of his shadow. Because they feared another Tran would do the same thing. Emma's fists clenched at her sides. They punished me for his courage. They punished you for his humanity, Blake said. He looked away for a moment, as though the weight of his own admission was too much to bear. Around them, the base commander stepped forward, ready to end the scene. His voice was sharp cold. General, this woman is unauthorized. She stole a Griffin. She defied protocol. I demand disciplinary action. But Blake's head snapped toward him, steel in his eyes. You demand. His voice cut like a blade. This woman just accomplished a rescue none of your so-called authorized pilots were able to even attempt. The commander faltered, stunned into silence. Blake turned back to Emma. For the first time, his expression softened. Emma, what you did today, your father would have been proud. No, he would have called it inevitable. He always said his daughter had more fire in her than he ever did. Emma swallowed hard. For years, she had waited for recognition, for proof she wasn't crazy, wasn't chasing a dream that everyone mocked. Now it stood before her, wearing silver stars on its shoulders. But the moment wasn't victory. Not yet. Blake leaned in, his voice low enough for only her to hear. This changes everything. The system will try to crush you for what you did. They will call it insubordination, theft, recklessness. They will want your career ended before it begins. Emma's pulse quickened. Then why are you here? Because, Blake said, his voice a mixture of iron and regret, I won't let them bury another Tran. The silence between them stretched, heavy with unspoken truths. The crowd watched, waiting for a verdict. Finally, Blake straightened, his voice booming once more. Effective immediately, Pilot 17 is recognized for extraordinary valor under combat conditions. Her actions saved 4 soldiers' lives. And, until further notice, she flies. Gasps rippled through the airfield. Officers turned to one another, confused, scandalized, some even outraged. But no one dared contradict him. Emma's eyes widened. For 7 years, she had been the mechanic who dreamed of wings. Now, with one declaration, she was a pilot. But beneath the rush of vindication, one thought echoed louder than the rest. Why now? Why had the general come on this day, at this hour, to witness her moment of defiance? That night, in her quarters, she sat awake long after lights out. The Griffin silver patch Blake had handed her resting on the table beside her. The storm outside had passed, but inside her chest, another storm was just beginning. Because Emma knew that what had happened today wasn't an accident. It was the start of something far bigger. If you discovered the person holding you back all these years also held the key to your future, would you trust them or fight them? The orders came in a sealed envelope. Report to Heritage Hall. 1,400 hours. Dress uniform. Emma had walked past that building countless times. It loomed at the center of Granite Ridge, a cathedral of steel and stone where only moments of history were allowed to live. Promotions, tributes, the ceremonies that defined a career. She had never once been invited inside. Until now. The November air bit at her skin as she crossed the courtyard, her dress blues pressed, shoes polished, every step echoing louder than it should. She felt every eye on her, some curious, some jealous, some still mocking, better at fixing than flying. She heard their whispers from years past. But today, the whispers couldn't reach her. The heavy oak doors of Heritage Hall opened with a groan, swallowing her into silence. The hall smelled of polish and age. Its walls glowed with history, rows upon rows of photographs and portraits, men and women who had worn wings of silver and gold. Legends, heroes, ghosts. Emma's footsteps echoed against marble floors. Her throat tightened as she noticed a new portrait, mounted with care in the very center of the wall. Colonel Robert Tran, her father, captured in his dress uniform, eyes bright, posture unyielding. The brass plaque beneath read, "Who trained the successor we failed to recognize." Emma's knees almost buckled. Her father's face, framed among the legends he had once spoken of, finally given the honor he had been denied in life. She reached out, fingertips trembling as they brushed the cool brass letters. And then, Lieutenant Tran. She turned. General Michael Blake stood beneath a row of chandeliers, hands folded behind his back. He looked smaller here, surrounded by history, stripped of the battlefield's noise. His silver hair caught the light, his eyes carrying decades of scars. "Sir," Emma managed, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. Blake's gaze softened as he nodded toward the portrait. "Your father should have been here long ago. I made sure he was." Emma swallowed hard. "Why now?" "Because today," Blake said, walking closer, "you proved him right." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small velvet case. Opening it, he revealed a patch unlike any she'd ever seen. Silver threads stitched into the form of a griffin, wings spread over storm clouds. "This," he explained, "is the Griffin Silver. It is not handed out. It is earned. 11 pilots in the entire world have it. Now 12. He placed the case in her hands. Emma stared at it, disbelief flooding her chest. I don't deserve this. I only did what everyone else was afraid to do," Blake interrupted. His voice was low, but there was no mistaking the steel beneath it. "When protocol failed. When hesitation threatened lives. When rules became chains, you acted. That's what real pilots do." Emma felt her chest tighten. "Sir, I wasn't supposed to fly." Blake's lips curved into something between a smile and a grimace. "Regulations don't fly helicopters, Lieutenant. People do." For a long moment, they stood in silence beneath her father's gaze. Then Blake turned, walking toward the tall windows that overlooked the flight line. 3 Griffins sat on the tarmac, engines silent, waiting. "You know," Blake said almost to himself, "your father once told me something. The best pilots aren't the ones who follow every rule. They're the ones who understand why rules exist, and when something greater matters more." Emma's eyes burned. She pinned the Griffin Silver to her flight suit with hands that no longer trembled. "What happens now, sir?" Blake turned back to face her, his steel-gray eyes softening. "Now you fly. You train the next generation. You carry the legacy your father left behind. And you show them what it means to earn wings, not by certification, but by courage." For the first time, a smile ghosted across Emma's lips. "Does that mean no one calls me maintenance anymore?" Blake's chuckle was quiet, but it carried years of regret lifted from his chest. "No, Lieutenant. From this day forward, you are Pilot 17, and you represent everything the Griffin program was created for." Emma looked back at her father's portrait, the brass plaque gleaming in the soft light. For 7 years, she had been invisible. For 7 years, she had carried the shadow of his death. Now, she carried his legacy. That night, as the stars spread over the Rockies, Emma sat by the window of her quarters, staring at the patch pinned to her chest. The base outside was quiet, but she knew whispers were already spreading. Some would call her reckless, others dangerous. But in the hearts of the soldiers she had saved, and the general who had saluted her, she was exactly what she had always claimed to be, a pilot. But even as she closed her eyes, she knew something else. The storm was not over. It had only begun. Do you believe legacies are inherited or created in the moments we choose to act? The next morning, the base felt different. Whispers traveled faster than aircraft. Mechanics stopped mid-task when she walked by. Pilots, men who once laughed at her grease-stained uniform, watched with a mix of awe and unease. Lieutenant Emma Tran was no longer invisible. But recognition was not the same as acceptance. Inside the briefing room, the tension was thick enough to cut. A dozen young recruits sat in neat rows, their notebooks open, pens poised. Their eyes flickered between Emma and the Griffin silver patch glinting on her flight suit. Some looked inspired, others skeptical. She stepped to the front of the room. For a moment, the weight of expectation pressed against her chest. This wasn't just about flying anymore. This was about teaching, about proving once and for all that courage had no rank, no gender, no permission slip. "My name is Pilot 17, Emma began, her voice clear. "You've heard the stories. Most of them are true. Some of them are exaggerated. None of them matter." The recruits leaned in. "What matters is this. When you sit in that cockpit, it doesn't care who you are. Not your title. Not your background. Not what people said about you. The helicopter only cares if you can fly it." Her gaze swept the room, locking onto each face. "And if you can't, the storm will find you. And it will decide." Later that day, Emma stood once more on the tarmac, facing the Griffin 77 Alpha. The same bird she had stolen, no claimed, just days before. But this time, the climb into the cockpit felt different. There was no fear of discovery, no shame of being maintenance. This time she belonged. The engines roared to life, the blades cutting the sky with that familiar, thunderous rhythm. As the helicopter lifted, recruits watched from below, their eyes wide, some already dreaming of the day they would take her seat. Emma guided the Griffin into the clouds, her hand steady, her heart calm. Her father's voice lingered in her memory, but for the first time, it was not a weight. It was a wind at her back. Back in Heritage Hall, General Blake stood alone beneath Colonel Robert Tran's portrait. He watched through the tall windows as the Griffin disappeared into the sky, carrying Robert's daughter higher than the system ever wanted her to go. His aide approached quietly. "Sir, there's still resistance. Some are calling for disciplinary review. They say promoting her sets a dangerous precedent." Blake's steel-gray eyes didn't leave the horizon. "Good. Let them resist. History isn't written by those who follow the rules. It's written by those who know when the rules no longer serve." As the Griffin cut through the sky, Emma allowed herself a smile. 7 years of silence had ended. 7 years of being judged by shadow had led to this moment. She wasn't just her father's daughter anymore. She wasn't the mechanic who dreamed of wings. She was Emma Tran, Pilot 17. And this was only the beginning. Have you ever been told you don't belong, only to find that the very storm meant to break you was the one that revealed your strength? Because sometimes the sky doesn't give you permission. It just waits for you to take it.